Here with my host, Cliff Kelly.
Hi.
Hello. And we have a panelist call, and I think you know this guy, but he's one of our usual members of our team. But
Right.
Sean Claiborne is a National Guard veteran and a VP of Wintrust Investments and Services as a financial advisor located in Lansing, Illinois, at
Mm-hmm.
First National Bank of Illinois, and public policy roundtable panelist on America's Heroes Group radio talk show. Also, we're going to play a clip first, Cliff, and then we'll go into a discussion about COVID-19, why the
Yeah.
pandemic has real estate markets booming. That's an interesting topic. So,
It certainly is. It certainly is, Doc. It certainly is. So, are we ready for that?
Have either of
Yes.
you exhibited symptoms of COVID in the last 14 days?
No.
Either of you been around anyone that had COVID in the last 14 days?
No.
Awesome, let's go. That's fun. Okay. It's one nice thing about being up here, you can social distance a lot.
I know.
The COVID-19 pandemic has many taking a fresh look at life outside cities. With 2/3 of the country already living in the suburbs and beyond, in hard-hit places like New York, some urban dwellers are contemplating what they might have once considered unthinkable: leaving.
The value of the city to us was being around all the people, being able to go to all the restaurants and the culture, like the museums and the plays and everything. And so you remove all of that, it's difficult to justify paying the rent, being in a small confined space, and having no access to being outdoors by yourself.
We're based in Darien, Connecticut. So in the first 6 months, which is really incredible when you think about how much business was not being able to be done during the pandemic, Fairfield County as a whole did about $2.36 billion in sales, and that's 12% over the same period last year. And even better than that, if we're just looking from the end of June to the end of June, pending sales are up 49%. It's really skyrocketed.
This is what we're like desperate for in the city,
I know, it's so nice.
is just some outdoor space.
It's not just the suburbs and greater metropolitan areas that are booming. People are also buying farther out, beyond typical commuter distances.
It went from 0 to 500 without any ramp up. The minute they relaxed it enough that people could really get into houses, and people were at that point realizing that this was not going to end.
With new listings down compared to normal years, competition for what's still available has been unusually fierce.
How much above asking do you think this will go? Because all of them are going.
I've got to go get my crystal ball. I left it in the car.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure it's going to go above ask. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. My guess is this is the kind of thing that's going to go right into a bidding war.
I think the majority of what we've seen are people that have been considering moving to the suburbs from the city, and it's really kind of been the nudge that's got them to the burbs, just with everything going on in the pandemic.
And there's reason to believe an exodus was coming regardless. Millennials, who were responsible for much of the urban growth in the early part of the decade, are reaching an age where city life might have run its course.
Since 2015 to 2020, a lot of cities have not grown as rapidly as they did in the first half of the decade. So it's not just New York, it's Chicago, it's Los Angeles. It's a kind of softening of growth among cities all over the country before the pandemic hit.
But on the heels of the millennial flight, another generation may just be waiting for their apartments.
Talked about people moving to cities 10 years ago. They were talking about millennials. Millennials are in cities. This is why cities are coming back. Well, now it's going to be the Gen Zers who are going to be part of that. And Gen Zers, even more so than millennials, are more racially diverse and have city roots, and they're used to living in this kind of arena. So, once the economy comes back just a little bit, cities are going to be very attractive to Gen Zers, just like cities were attractive to millennials back when the Great Recession was at its peak.
While few companies have yet to commit to a permanent work-from-home future, the question still remains: is this new normal here to stay?
Even if New York looks better, I'm not going to get on a crowded subway every morning to get to the office. And, our jobs are super flexible where we can work from home. Gosh, even if everything's still locked down in 6 months, it'd be nice to have space to be out here. I just don't think that there's any way we'll be back to normal for the foreseeable future.
So what do you see going here? What's going to happen, Doc?
Yeah, this is very interesting. We have
It
our
is,
financial
yeah.
wizard on the line, Sean, and
Yeah.
for me, I'm looking at it and saying, "Wow, this is going to be a different time and a different place for us." And maybe Sean, you can give us
Yeah.
insight into what they were saying, and then what your perspective on it is.
Certainly, certainly. The thing is, I mean, no honesty, you got to take a step back and look at what they were talking about, because you're talking about really a bunch of different things that kind of get muddled into the hype. But really, no honesty, this is not really a phenomenon. As they mentioned in the piece, this really is more of a trend that's been happening. Specifically, this trend they're speaking about has been happening for the last 10 years, even before the pandemic occurred. And even in Chicago, we've been looking at our numbers in Chicago where people are leaving the cities to find better housing, cheaper housing. That's one of the things. So the kind of it's really an intersection of a lot of different things with housing, jobs, and the life cycle of the working class. So when you're 22 years old, think about it. When you're 22 years old, you're white collar. You want bright lights in big city. By the time you're 32 years old, your nerves, those things are getting on your nerves. You want a career, focus on your jobs, have children. By the time you're 42, you're thinking about getting some peace and quiet and trying to save expenses. 52, your kids are repeating the cycle, So that's kind of what we're actually seeing in that story. But we're also talking about a specific type of person. We're talking about mainly the white collar working, or either the white blue collar worker or the white working class white collar worker. That's what you even saw or heard in the video or the piece. So when we're looking at the broader perspective of how veterans actually buy houses and what you see in the veteran community, especially guys that come back from overseas, they're not looking for bright lights in big cities. They're looking to raise families, get back to normalcy, trying to re-engage back into civilian life. So it's a totally different kind of perspective when you're looking at just one demographic versus the entire broad picture of the housing market. So, but that's been a long-term trend, and it always will repeat itself. There's always going to, just like when baby boomers were moving out of the cities into this, then made the suburbs. Then you had a period where people were moving back into the cities and building them up again. Housing prices started going sky high. That generation gets older, wants more peace and quiet, wants more a stable environment for their kids to raise a family. They move out back into the suburbs again, and that cycle repeats. You start seeing pockets of cities and urban areas. We look at Lincoln Park. What we call Lincoln Park today used to be housing projects 20, 30 years ago. People move into these areas where they can find cheaper housing. When you're young, looking for a job, you're moving into these areas that are on the fringes of the affluent communities. So if you have the opportunity and the income to do that, you're building up those affluent areas, those fringes, and then it kind of forces all the housing prices up. And that's going to continue. This is not something that's going to be a new blip in the market because of COVID. The COVID, like one person mentioned, did nudge. That was the final step to nudge a few people in that direction. Because, I've been thinking about forever moving into Indiana, moving into an area where the taxes are lower, where you have less crime, where you have more land and more property for the money that you're spending. That's what people are looking for, and that's never going to change. That's always been the case.
Yeah. Is that going to bring them? Is that what's going to happen now?
That's happening right now. It's been happening for the last decade or so. So we're in a cycle right now where people, where the millennial generation and people that have in that business cycle and that job cycle, people that were in their 20s and 30s or 20s 10 years ago, or their 30s 10 years ago, now 30 and 40. So they're thinking about buying homes and settling down, and they're thinking about, do I want to live in a small house in a city for $500,000 or $350,000 or $1 million, or I can get twice as much land, twice as much value, and cheaper taxes, and send my kids to a good school in the suburbs, where I have less congestion, less noise, more peace and quiet, more peace of mind. But having said all that, I think really it's really a good time to really consider people that are looking at their finances right now. Really need to consider what their housing situation or living situation is. Interest rates have also come down a lot because of what's happened in the economy. You had a big cut in interest rates. You can get a 30-year VA loan right now anywhere between 2.6 to 3.2%. If you go to Streamline, you go 3.2. A regular conventional VA loan was about 2.6. On the conventional civilian side, it's about the same, maybe slightly higher on the civilian side, and that goes for 1 to 4 unit buildings. So you can buy a single family home, and you look at that as a way to really try to save money and even invest for your future. Because the people that drive the economy, the people that actually have the biggest benefit of having an effect in their communities, and they're also having an effect on how well their communities develop, are the property owners, people that own the land in those communities. If you're a property owner, you're a taxpayer, a property taxpayer, you have a lot more control and a lot more say to try to build sustainable, healthy, bright, vibrant communities for the future. That's one thing to think about. And if you can bring your expenses down now with this pandemic, there's still no telling when this really will end. Even though there's a few cures, or not cures, but vaccines out there that might actually help this abate sooner, this could happen again.
But you know,
we have to take it. Go ahead.
Oh, but one thing I was really interested in was like, there's a person I think he's absolutely an absolute economic genius is Robert Reich. He was the former Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, and one of the things he keeps bringing up is that the middle class has been having a widening economic gap as far as the 1%. The 1% is the most richest people. That there's the inequality in pay is widening, and so for the millennials, many of them actually could not even pay back their school loans. They had to move in with their parents and those kinds of things. So is that another part of the impetus, for them to establish themselves at a better cost-effective situation?
Definitely. I mean, definitely, because we look at that situation. That's been a trend that's been happening ever since the Industrial Revolution. Yeah. I mean, the thing about technology, and the one thing that we have to talk about too is technology and how that's played an important role. Automation, and also the thing about the working class. We're talking about specifically demographics. We're specifically talking about blue collar, working class people and low to moderate income individuals. The affluent has been growing at a rapid pace. This country, besides next to China, creates the most millionaires in the world. We're creating like something like 100 millionaires an hour or something crazy like that in the U.S. economy. And it sounds like a ridiculous number, but it actually is probably higher than that. I can't remember the exact term. It might be like 1,000 a day or something along those lines. But I mean, the thing of it is that when we're creating this wealth gap, the people that are slow to shift or change their skills or adapt to the economy are the ones that get left behind in the struggling communities. And we've seen that a lot in the African American community. We've seen that a lot in a lot of Black and brown communities. Once again, you have to really take the bull by the horns and really look at what tools and resources you have at your disposal to improve your situation. And one of those things is managing cash flow. We talk about it often with wealth management. As a wealth manager, one thing I talk to a lot of people when I do seminars and workshops is one thing that you can look at and you can take control over to change your community is becoming a homeowner, becoming a property owner. We talk about that as a shift away from there was a lot of us talk about this about 10 years ago about the importance or the devaluing importance of owning property. But at the end of the day, property is still one of the number one resources and tools you can use to change your economic situation and to change a community. So when you have enough property owners coming together and building communities outside of the city areas, outside of the urban areas, wherever you can afford to buy some property and get around like-minded citizens that can have the same vision for the future. They're not talking about landlords and renters and things like that, but people that are actually going to be homeowners in these communities, that have a vested interest in those communities. Then you can start building the future of nice, affluent communities and actually build wealth. Because once you own property, one of the biggest expenses you have in your household finance is your housing expense. So you can control that and get that under control. That helps you build wealth for the future. And also relieves a lot of stress off of you trying to figure out how do you pay the next month's mortgage and things like that. And also one thing to take a look at is property taxes. Property taxes outside of the urban areas, the further out you go, oftentimes the taxes are a lot cheaper. Suburban communities are struggling, especially around big urban centers, just because they attracted a lot of residential people out of the cities 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but they didn't do a good enough job of attracting business and industry into those same communities. So who carries the tax burden for those schools and for those police officers and firemen and all the services that you need? That's the homeowner. So those taxes go up, and now you have a lot of cities, especially here in Illinois and Cook County, they're realizing that and trying to catch up. So what you want to do is when you're thinking about this now, this kind of opportunity with the technology that we have, you can work from home. You can make your income off of the digital economy. So you can think about moving further outside the confines of the suburban and the greater metropolitan areas and going into more rural areas where there's peace and quiet, there's green grass, there's trees, your kids don't have to worry about gunshots and violence and things like that. You're not as worried about leaving your door open at night, things like that. And you can actually start to build a sustainable future for your family and for yourself.
Interesting. So that's why there's so many people doing that. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. That's like I said, been a trend, and it's not just a trend that's unique to this pandemic or this time frame, this is a cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again. From the baby boomers to you can even link this to the Great Migration from African Americans moving to the cities in Chicago. I mean, back in the day when you had African Americans in the South that didn't have a piece of the pie, working for little or nothing, they couldn't build economic fortunes for themselves because they were locked out of it. Saw Chicago and the big cities in the North as an opportunity to move, transport, get a good job, get some land, get some property, and build a future. But unfortunately, because of the laws at the time, you had redlining, you had a lot of things that are also barriers to that wealth and that growth that African Americans had to overcome. But fortunately, now we have a different time and era. Don't think that there still aren't struggles or there are still barriers, but there's a lot of opportunity, especially for veterans who have access to VA loans, things like that, to actually improve your life and actually think about what you can do to build wealth. One of those things, once again, is looking at land. So you're looking at lower taxes, more space to go out and breathe and kind of live your life, less congestion. You can park your car. You can have good schools. You can create good schools with a good tax base. You have less crime. Technology, once again, is also being something that fosters that. So you can go out and you can get a digital job. You can work from home. A lot of white collar jobs today. So that's one thing that's really something we need as veterans to do. Looking at some of the veterans who are out there that are looking at their financial situation and kind of struggling, wondering how they're going to improve their lifestyle or get ahead or achieve their financial goals. Look at trying to change your housing situation, or look at ways you can either refinance to get a lower rate. Not a bad time to do it. Rates are at historic lows. Look at possibly becoming a landlord. If a lot of veterans, a lot of people that are hands-on, who are electricians by trade, carpenters by trade, things like that, think of this as an opportunity to start going out and acquiring property. And once again, if you have the right mindset, you can literally transform a community. But one other thing I will mention and warn people when they go out and do this, don't bite off more than you can chew. Always look at your financial picture and make sure that you're not getting into too much debt, that you're not also taking on too much property that takes up too much of your time, because then it becomes a financial burden as opposed to an asset.
Oh, it's a good, very, very good point. Yeah. And, we have a lot of homeless veterans, too, now.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And, there may be some other economic opportunities for them, not in a centralized city, where you said it's really hard to swim. When you have so many, the price of a hamburger is $20 more than it is in a suburb, or you don't have the economic opportunity or job opportunity. So, thinking about making that switch is kind of interesting now.
Now, see, Brian, I remember an interesting point, a story that we ran across not too long ago. There was actually a homeless man that was not far from our old studio at the old WNCO studios over in Cottage Grove in '87, and he was actually able to rebuild his life by moving to the country. He moved to North Carolina, and being close to a military base, there was a lot more resources for him to get mental health that he needed, mental health services for himself. He had schizophrenia. So that was a huge turning point, because the environment wasn't so much centered around the hustle and bustle of the city. The goals and the priorities of that rural area was totally different. And it was more suitable for someone to go in there and actually rebuild their life. So now he's not on the streets. He's actually getting health care. He's actually living in a home. He's actually doing a lot better than he did 3 years ago, just 3 years ago. So those are types of things and realities that we have to take in consideration. But also one thing to mention as well is for homeowners, especially those of us that may be even doing okay right now, you have an opportunity to forbear or seek forbearance on your debts. A lot of people are concerned about the money going into the economy, thinking this is going to spur a lot of inflation, which is very much possible. And it's probably likely, more likely than not likely, that we're going to have some inflation. I'm not afraid of inflation. Inflation is actually a very good thing for people that hold debt. The reason why is you're near debt, because your debt becomes cheaper in times of inflation. If you don't increase your debt, you can keep your debt the same. Your debt becomes cheaper in times of inflation because your income usually increases. So this is a good time to think about forbearance and things like that. Not use forbearance as a way to just skip out on debt or just not pay your bills. But if you get into a situation 3 or 4 months down the road, if this pandemic worsens and unemployment increases or hits a breaking point where there's just not enough money to pay out to cover the millions of people that don't have jobs, you might be finding yourself in a situation where you might need to have some cash on hand. So if you can be a little bit more efficient, if you're struggling to make a payment on a bill or a debt, think about forbearance, because when you activate a forbearance plan with your creditor, it doesn't mean that you're going to skip a payment necessarily at that moment. It just means that they are not going to hold it against you for the next 90 days. And then once the 90 days expires, depending on your situation, you can either extend the forbearance or work out some kind of repayment plan if you didn't pay a bill. But what you don't want to have happen is over the next 90 days, if this pandemic or the situation with jobs and employment becomes worse, you can't make a bill and it hits your credit. Now you have less financial opportunities because your credit has a big ding on it, or if creditors are less willing to work with you because now you're in a worse situation. So, I mean, think about that. Look at forbearance options. It doesn't hurt you to activate it, and it's only there if you actually need it.
Listen, you make some great points. Doc, anything else before we?
Oh yeah, I was wondering about one thing is, with people, a lot of our veterans, come back and they have disabilities, because you mentioned, schizophrenia, which, anyone can have. But, with our veterans who come back with disabilities, are there any advantages to going outside of the city? Are there any more benefits that you could get, or I'm not sure aware if there's anything with how other states handle land acquisition and discounts on, taxes and all those kinds of things.
Right.
Because
Doc, we're going to have to take a break. We're almost
yes,
time.
Yes, sir.
And we have to hear from our good friend, our executive producer, Glenda Smith.
Samantha, right. That's it.
Yeah, to our guests. Thank you. What did you say?
My pleasure.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, one
Great.
thing I want to mention really quickly is
Sure.
just a shout out to the family of Jerry Taft, who passed away. He was a veteran. He was a pilot. He was a fierce pilot, combat pilot, and he was on the weather, the Channel Station 7 for about 35 years. But we just want to reach out to the veteran who passed, who was an icon in Chicago.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
That's
great.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Glenda's ready to go.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thanks to all of our guests, and of course, as he just mentioned, Glenda's ready to go, and we'll do that. And of course, we will talk to you later.
The governor of Talk Radio has spoken.
The one and only, the man, the voice, the icon legend himself. What a great show today. Great job, Cliff. Great job.
Great job.